You woke up this morning to an alarm. You checked your phone before you even sat up. By 9 a.m., you were at a desk or a counter or behind a wheel, and you won't really stop until the sun goes down. And even then, you'll probably still be answering messages. Now picture a hunter-gatherer 20,000 years ago. No alarm, no boss, no calendar. Some days he worked 2 hours. Some days he worked none at all. So why does it feel like he had more freedom than you do? And is that actually true? For 95% of human history, nobody had a job. Nobody clocked in. There was no such thing as Monday. And yet somehow that same species built pyramids, crossed oceans, and eventually invented the 8-hour workday that you're stuck in right now. Something happened between then and now that changed what work even means. And once you see what it was, you'll never look at your Tuesday the same way again. In the 1960s, an anthropologist named Richard Lee spent months living with the Kung San, a hunter-gatherer people in the Kalahari Desert. He wanted to answer a simple question: how many hours does it actually take to survive without agriculture, without supermarkets, without any of it? His answer shocked everyone. Adults in the camp worked about 2.5 days a week, around 6 hours a day on the days they worked at all. Some of the hardest hunters in the group topped out at 32 hours a week, less than a lot of part-time jobs today. A few years later, an anthropologist named Marshall Sahlins looked at that data and gave it a name that stuck: the original Affluent society. Not wealthy because they had more, wealthy because they needed less. And it wasn't just the Kalahari. Studies of the Hadza in Tanzania found similar patterns. Vigorous, sweat-through-your-shirt effort maxed out at about an hour a day for men, and even less for women. Most of the actual work was walking, digging, carrying, steady, unhurried, nothing like a shift on a factory floor. There was no clock telling anyone to start. People worked when the moment was right, when the fruit was ripe, when the tracks were fresh, and stopped the second they had enough. Not enough to stockpile, just enough for today. Here's the part almost nobody tells you. Lee's original number only counted time spent actually out hunting or gathering. It didn't count the walk back to camp. It didn't count butchering the kill, tanning the hide, sharpening tools, hauling firewood, and the childcare happening the entire time in the background. When later researchers went back and counted everything, all the invisible labor that keeps a camp alive, the number stopped looking like a vacation. Once you count food processing, tool making, and the maintenance of daily life, the average across well-studied hunter-gatherer societies lands somewhere around 40 to 45 hours a week. That's not a typo. That's almost exactly the same number sitting on your work contract right now. So which is it? 6 hours a day or a full-blown 9 to 5? The honest answer is both studies were measuring different things, and that gap is the whole story. Because here's what stayed true no matter how you count it. Nobody was telling them when to do those 40 hours. There was no manager, no performance review, no dragging yourself out of bed at 6 a.m. because someone else decided that's when the day starts. Work happened in bursts, tied to weather, to seasons, to the herd, to how everyone in the group felt that morning. Then it stopped, and people sat around a fire and told stories until they fell asleep. You didn't lose hours. You lost the choice of when to spend them. So if it wasn't hunting and gathering that trapped us, what did? About 12,000 years ago, in a handful of river valleys across the world, people started doing something that had never been done before at scale. They stopped following food. They started growing it. Wheat in the Fertile Crescent, rice in the Yangtze Valley, maize in Mesoamerica. And for the first time in the history of our species, humans committed to staying in one place, tied to a patch of dirt that needed constant attention or it would fail.
Here's the part that should sound familiar. A field of wheat doesn't feed you if you forage it for 2 hours and walk away. It needs to be planted, weeded, guarded from animals, harvested before the weather turns, threshed, stored, and protected from rot and thieves, every single season without fail. Miss the harvest window once, and you don't just have a bad week, you starve for a year. For the first time, humans had created a system that punished rest. And it got worse. Farming produced more calories per acre than foraging ever could, which meant more children survived. More children meant more mouths. More mouths meant more land needed to be farmed just to stay even. Populations grew into the exact amount of food available and then kept growing, which meant there was never a surplus of time again, only a surplus of people who needed to be fed. Some researchers have called this the great trap of agriculture. It wasn't a step up in comfort, it was a treadmill nobody could get off, because by the time anyone noticed, going back to the old way could no longer feed everyone who now existed. And once land had to be farmed every year in the same spot, something else got invented that had never existed before. The idea that a specific patch of ground could belong to a specific person. Hunter-gatherers didn't own land the way we do. Territory was used, shared, moved through, but a wheat field you planted in spring and would harvest in fall, that needed a fence, a boundary, a name on it. Ownership was born out of agriculture, and ownership needed defending. For the first time, some people could grow more than they needed, while others grew less. That surplus had to be stored, which meant someone had to guard the storehouse, which meant someone had to organize the guards, which meant someone became the person everyone else answered to. Chiefs, kings, tax collectors, all of it grew out of a grain silo. Hunter-gatherer bands rarely had a boss because there was nothing worth hoarding. Agriculture created the first thing in human history worth hoarding, and the first people whose entire job was making sure everyone else kept working to fill it. That basic structure never really left, it just changed clothes. The chief became the landlord, the grain silo became the paycheck, the threat of a bad harvest became the threat of missing rent. You don't work for a warlord with a spear anymore. You work to keep a roof that technically belongs to a bank on land that technically belongs to whoever bought it before you were born. You're not paying for shelter. You're paying rent on a system that started the day someone first said, "This field is mine." And then, around 250 years ago, industrialization took the agricultural trap and put it on a clock. Factories needed workers at the exact same time every single day, whether the harvest was ready or not, whether your body felt like it or not. The workday stopped being shaped by sunrise and season. It started being shaped by a whistle. That's where your 9 to 5 actually comes from, not from human nature, from a factory owner's need for predictable output 150 years ago. So here you are. You don't hunt, you don't farm, you've probably never grown a single thing you've eaten, and yet you still work roughly the same number of hours a kung hunter did in a fully accounted week 60 years ago, except you don't get to choose when. You complain the Wi-Fi is slow while doing work that 12,000 years ago didn't exist as a category of human experience at all. You get irritated waiting for a coffee order while somewhere in your ancestry someone spent an entire season making sure a single field didn't fail. The Stone Age didn't make you tired. Agriculture didn't make you tired. Ownership did. Surplus did. The whistle did. The hours were never really the problem. The problem was the day you stopped being the one who decided when they started. For 95% of human history, nobody clocked in because there was nothing yet worth clocking into. Then somebody planted a field, and 12,000 years later, you're still paying for it.